Yeah, so as we were saying off air, my plaque came in the mail, and competitions want to make money. I entered into 3 songwriting competitions last year in 2020 because I thought I'll give it a go, and I felt ready to do it. But it can be a money making business at times. What do you think about that?
I think you've got a good point, actually. I mean, sometimes if you do the mathematics and if it's a worldwide competition
Mm,
and they're charging you a 25, $30 an entry fee,
yeah.
and it's got a healthy prize money, maybe 10, 20 grand or whatever. But you realize if 50,000 people enter, let's say,
Mm.
at $30 a pop, that means for the entry fee alone, they're getting $1.5 million.
Because APRA, I entered into the Harry Vander songwriting competition for
Andrew and Young,
APRA.
yeah. Yeah.
That was
Hmm.
about $50, but I didn't get any placing. I did
Yeah.
one in America. I think it was the ISC songwriting competition. I made it to the semi-finals, but again, didn't get there. So this is the first time I've ever won a prize. So
Well, yeah, but the thing is, the APRA one at $50 a pop. You probably realize
mm,
that there's a very limited amount of people who would do that, who
mm,
would qualify. First, you have to be an APRA member, as far as I know.
mm,
So it's a very low, very small amount of people. Plus, you actually are going to have to um, pay people to administer it
mm,
and to run it. And you got to hire people, and then you've got to award the prize money. So the APRA one at $50, I can understand. But one of these worldwide things that will get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of entries,
mm.
and they'll make an absolute packet on it. And that's I suppose you enter with both eyes open
Mm.
um, into these sorts of things. But I would very rarely now apply to a competition that requires a steep entry fee. I think 20 to 25 is enough. And always be aware of the fact that they reserve the right not to award a prize.
Mm.
When you can think of, $25 a pop for 50,000 people.
Mm.
All right. So that's a lot of money goes in there, and they don't have to administer a prize.
Exactly.
They keep all the money. So you got to be wary of them. There are certain established and well-established competitions that you become aware of, and those are terrific to enter. APRA being one of them. Um, but there are others that fly by night productions in association with white knuckle seat um, warmers productions presents a, a prize for the funniest song about lemmings,
Mm.
you know, and suddenly you also have to be worried about not just those sorts of fly by night things, one offs, but also competitions that change their rules regularly. Um, that in the classical area that require very specific
Mm.
instrumentation, and then only award a prize to something that's already been written and performed with that in mind, with that instrumentation. And you start to think it's almost as if the judges said that piece deserves a prize. Let's change the everything so that it looks like this piece was made for this competition, whereas in fact the competition was made for the piece.
Yeah.
And that's happened on more than one occasion. And
I
that's the thing you've got to be wary of. I wouldn't go back to them. You
yeah.
know.
I think I remember in my undergrad, it was my head teacher. Sort of, he wasn't a big fan of the Harry Vander and all that.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
but I sort of used it. I just wanted to get my work out there. But
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, I mean, probably the best way to get your work out there
mm,
is either, well, now it's to have some sort of digital
mm,
presence, online presence, or if it's a bit more, if you need instruments, then make friends. The best friends you're ever going to have are the ones you went through uni with,
mm,
you went through conservatorium with, or met afterwards. Through that, I mean, the people who regularly play my music are friends first and foremost. They're people I
mm,
know, and yeah, because I'm not famous enough to have people hear about me. I keep thinking, although I do get at least once or twice a week, someone says, "Oh, you're Houston Dunleavy," and you think, well, yeah, it's a name that you can't forget, really. That's one thing about being saddled with a name like that. Once you've learned it, that's it.
Mm.
But you make your friends, and very often one will say, "Well, do you write anything for my instrument?" And so, well, as a matter of fact, or if somebody says, do you have anything? I said, no, but would you like me to write something? So you don't push, you collaborate, and you have fun, and you become perfectly normal and uh, interactive with someone. There's also the thing of just last week on Melbourne Composers League, they put up an interview with me about a piece called the Concord Duet,
Mm-hmm.
which is for flute and clarinet. And that happened to come out of an experience of actually staying with a couple, um, Garrett and Melissa. And they were so nice to each other, and they lived in such harmony as husband and wife, and they had a baby, and everything was discussed and agreed, and it was all lovely. So they lived in harmony, in Concord, if you like, but they also lived in Concord in New South Wales. And so there was a day, I had a day off, one of those odd things that you have every now and then. And I decided I'd write a piece
Mm-hmm.
for them in that day while they were out. And my computer decided that was the time it was going to pack it in. So I wrote the piece with gasp, pencil and paper, which I
Nice.
had some around. Wow, what old-fashioned, old school stuff. So there's this. That's why it's the length it is. It probably would have been a longer piece had I written it, on computer, more productive. But in another way, doing it in pencil and paper was a good discipline. And it was it's about a 4-minute piece. It's had a few performances. They played it when they came home that night.
Mm.
And they had a kind of a slow read through it. And it was, oh, this piece works. So it got its premiere down here in Melbourne, in St Jude's in Carlton, a couple of years ago, and it's been performed a couple of other places. But no, that's a different thing where you just find this. What can you do to say thank you to people who've been so nice to you? Well, you write them something that
What
says how nice.
software are you using? You're a Finale. I use Dorico.
Yep. When I'm not using pencil and paper, I use Finale. Yeah.
Yeah.
The only reason I use Finale, is because one day I hope they'll actually come and offer me a deal to say that I use Finale. But that's never happened in the 30 years or so that I've been doing it. Finale burst onto the scene back in, you ready for this, 1987,
Wow. Shit.
which may have been before you were born. When were you born?
93.
Oh yeah, Finale was good by then.
Serious?
Yeah, it was good by then. In 1987, it was terrible. I mean, like most, it didn't have much competition because people didn't know what they were doing. There were a few others out there, like Professional Composer, Cakewalk, and so on, and they weren't that great. Let's face it. They didn't do an awful lot for you. If you wanted to write something that had more than 4 lines or was more than just something and piano or a song and a lead sheet, you really were out of luck. And Finale came along saying, we can give you orchestral scores. And so the early Finale scores, you can see them. For example, Barry Cunningham's Vast, one of the first Australian pieces written in Finale. And it is vast. The piece is enormous. It more than fits on. It's more than can fit on a CD. It's about 90 minutes, 95 minutes or so, and it was involved 7 different dance companies, and was played all over Australia in every city. So it was an amazing coup for him. But he wrote the score in Finale, and there was an awful lot of problems with it. I mean, I was here the amanuensis, and some of them I was called in to basically correct by hand stuff that couldn't be done in Finale. But that was back in 1980. Actually, that was pre-87, come to think of it. That was 85. So Finale's been around since about 84, 83, 84.
What about Sibelius?
Sibelius came along as the I'm snapping at the heels of Finale to make it look good. By the time Sibelius came along, I had so much invested in the thought process of Finale and understood the way Finale put all its music together. There's basically one golden rule about Finale that I'll tell you in a moment. Having to then tear all that down and think a new way for Sibelius, I thought that would get in the way of my productivity.
No, fair enough.
I could do it, but the simple rule about Finale, which is a simple rule but difficult and complex in practice, is remember or know which tool you used in order to put this particular piece of notation together. That way you can go in and edit. The hard part about Finale is editing. You can you can play stuff in, all that sort of stuff very quickly, but it's never really that good or accurate compared to what notation might be. And you've got to go in and edit it. So you need to know what tool you've used and how to edit with that tool. And they come up with updates. Mostly their updates are good. There's been one bad one in which they froze and they stopped you being able to take diminuendo and crescendo marking lines and put them on angles. It was all straight.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always work for notation. And they still haven't fixed that. I guess there's just not.
Looked at moving to Dorico?
I have looked at Dorico, but the same thing. I'd have to learn it I'd have to learn a whole new system, and I'm too busy writing stuff to come out,
I find Dorico's easy than Sibelius.
That's what I'm told. That's what I'm told. And the thing is, though, because I've been doing Finale now since 1985, not 87. We're getting on for a long time, 35 years or so. It's like saying, drive another car or a different kind of car, which doesn't have an accelerator or doesn't have a brake. You have to use fingers, and you can still drive, but the whole new system takes you a while. And it's not that I couldn't learn it. I mean, I could learn it. I don't doubt myself there, but I'd have to stop composing for a while.
Well, they've made it where you can use your keyboard and it's like you're typing.
Yeah, you do that with Finale as well.
But I found my work process on Dorico is much quicker than it was on Sibelius, because the manual on Sibelius is like, that thick? It's just so confusing. And
exactly.
Dorico, they've simplified it so much, and they got their YouTube channel actually show you.
Well, Finale has those sorts of things as well. I'm not trying to set them all up against one another, but they all have tutorials and so on that are visual for those who are more visually attuned to things. Finale's entire manual is now online, so you just go to the help button and you get straight on it.
How thick is it?
Well, it's an online, so it could be, it's very thin. But if the last one, I don't know if I've got the old one lying around here. I'm looking around. I don't think I do. But it was thick. It was doorstep thick. But that's because it can do an awful lot. I'm still waiting for the. I think the main thing is that most of us are waiting for the MIDI realizations to catch up with Cubase and VST and all those that have really terrific sounds. We can only do so much with Garriton, which is the one Finale uses, and the onboard processor. They don't sound quite enough like real instruments, for example, to say, well, I can pass this off as the London Symphony Orchestra. No, you can't. But it's a great demo. It's still a good demo, and with excuse me, if you do enough with the reverb and sound treatments and so on, it can be fairly convincing to a less discerning ear than yours or mine, or anybody watching this probably. It doesn't sound too bad, but you can tell. There's always the digital tells for certain instruments.
Yeah, it's better to have your work performed live, I think.
Yeah,
It's
but
much better.
a lot of conductors, and a lot of performers really appreciate the fact you could send them something that gives you an idea how it sounds. I actually mentioned this maybe last time I was working on this euphonium concerto,
Mm.
And I've finished it now since we've last talked. Um, and yeah, it doesn't sound like a brass band sounds. It has far less warmth than an actual brass band sound. But you send it to the conductor and to the soloist, and you say, "Look, here's the sound," and they go, oh, "Okay." Then that works at that tempo, whatever. And it takes some of their. It's like listening to a recording. I mean, I remember reading a book by a conductor called Eric Leinsdorf called The Composer's Advocate.
Mm.
Somebody gave it to me for my 21st birthday or something. I see, I was a nerd even back then. And he says, well, he was asked, do you listen to the recordings of other conductors? And he said, of course I do. Particularly those who conducted it 20, 30 years ago, because I want to hear the piece. I want to hear their version of it. I want to learn from that.
Mm.
I want to learn what works. It's a tool that we have. And so this is in some ways the MIDI demo is the modern hi-fi recording as a teaching tool. And so we can listen to it, admittedly without the benefit of human interpretation so much, but we can still hear what it's meant to sound like if it were played by an orchestra of robots, for example. But no, I think you use those for what they are. Use them for their strengths, and their strength is that you can send them off as a demo and say, look, here's how it's meant to sound. At least here's how all the notes sound. I'm pretty sure that everything's in range because finale, I'm sure Sibelius and Dorico do this as well. Tell you if a note's out of range.
Mm-hmm.
Finale has an extra thing that it prints the notes and puts red on their note head if it's outside of like a high school player's range, for example, because there's an awful lot of music written for that age group, and so you don't want to write music that's unplayable for a certain grade level or something.
Dorico does that too.
Yeah, and so and there's a good reason for that, because that's a real helpful tool, because you don't necessarily know all the possible ranges of every instrument for a student who's in pre-tertiary education.
Remember Beethoven's time, they never had all this software. They had to know their stuff.
Well, they learned differently, yes, but you can't say that they necessarily all went straight onto the page. Sometimes you have to make changes and revisions, and a lot of it's recycled. You got to remember that you're recycling stuff that's already known to work. Beethoven had an interesting advantage. We're talking about software. It's not really software, but it's we could think of it as 19th century software. He had a friend called Maelzel, who I think was Swiss, and Maelzel was the ultimate tinkerer, the ultimate inventor, and he had a great interest in music.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd do things like invent mutes for the piano, things like that, crazy stuff. And Beethoven, because Beethoven was always looking to make a buck, would invest in some of it, and sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. But there was one spectacular thing that Maelzel invented that did work, and that was the metronome. And you'll see on those older scores a tempo marking with M.M. which means Meltzel metronome.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the tempo on the Meltzel metronome, 120 per minute, for example. You don't necessarily see that much now because we don't use you got digital metronomes, but the concept of the metronome comes from this guy Meltzer. I don't know if Beethoven made a packet on the metronome, but he should have, because it was wildly successful, and it's one of those first sort of teaching aids. But there have also been other forms of software, I suppose you could say, even back in the days of medieval times. We have something like Guido's hand,
Yeah.
where you have all of these things actually mean something. I mean, look, there are 12 differences here. There are 12 segments on your four fingers. There's a spot there for every note. There's 2 octaves here, 2 octaves over here. So you could actually, there's a teaching method that's possible, and a learning method that's possible. We are very adept as human beings at making things that help us learn. And we're very good at teaching. We're very good at teaching. We don't, nowadays, I don't think we value it enough, but I think as people, we're very good at teaching and working out ways of learning stuff.
Yeah, I mean, composers before me and you were born had to know all their stuff. And,
Well, they did, but they also had to learn new stuff too. I mean, you can tell when Haydn and Mozart meet and start to look at each other's music because their music changes.
Mm.
You can tell when Mozart finds out about Bach because suddenly there's all this counterpoint in his music that wasn't there before. You can tell when Haydn has clarinets available, which is in his last stints in London.
Mm.
So, but they had to learn them on the spot. So he'd sit down with the guy and say, "Oh, look, tell me what this instrument can do. Show me."
Mm.
So they didn't necessarily have to know everything, but they did have to have the ability, as we do, to absorb new things. And yes, I agree with you. I don't think we should allow our software to dictate the musical ranges that we write. I think we need to know the fact that the lowest note on this instrument is X and the highest note is Y. And that such things as, for example, it's a little known fact, Stephen, that a low C sharp to D trill, or D flat to D natural trill on a bassoon that's below the bass clef is impossible. Because of the way the fingering's set up, you can't get backwards and forwards very quickly. A couple of saxophone licks are impossible. Clarinet note combinations, unless you have a particular kind of clarinet system called the full bohem, you can't play. In fact, the Bernstein clarinet sonata, I don't know, you're a clarinet player, aren't you? Yeah. I don't know if you looked at the Bernstein clarinet sonata.
I didn't get a chance in my undergrad, but I heard about it.
I learned it from my last year at high school, HSC, BCE exam. And there's an ending bit that goes la-dee-da-da-da-dee, and it's impossible to play on a clarinet unless it has that extra little pinky key that turns it into a full bohem system. And so when Bernstein wrote it, which I believe is when he was a student at Curtis, he would have written it for a friend who had a full bohem. Mm. Otherwise, you can't play. You have to slide in it with your left hand pinky, and you can always hear it when unlike saxophone where you can slide effectively because there's those rollers between the keys. When you're a clarinetist, as you well know, sliding between the E and the F sharp key or B and C sharp, you always hear blah in the middle, right? Yes, blah, 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 and it can't be done. So even those guys, make mistakes.
Well, there was some stuff by Malcolm Arnold which was very difficult to play. Sonatina, I struggled, and the Firebird. by Stravinsky. I think it was the second movement. It's just awful crossing fingering.
Yep, there's a lot of Stravinsky clarinet stuff, but it's all possible.
Yeah,
it's not impossible. It just means that you can't go out tonight. You've got to stay home and practice.
ugh.
And it's only 2 bars, and yet as somebody once said, I can't practice this and maintain my lifestyle, but you have to. If you're going to go out and practice, then, or stay in and practice, I should say, then that's the job you have. It's part of your work. Admittedly, it's also a composer's responsibility to write something that is physically possible to play. I used to think it was just the composer, the performer's problem, and they had to find a solution. But no, we've got to find the solution as composers if you like, we give them the problem, but we know what the solution is going to be. Sometimes they find better solutions than we have because they know the instrument better. But I think there's definitely an onus on us to know the stuff that the software has. I agree with you. My old teacher, Donald Erb, would turn in his grave if he thought any of his students had a cheat sheet for orchestral ranges, or had to keep going to the orchestration book to look at how to write for something. Every so often, it's a bit like being a lawyer. You might have to look something up. But right now, I couldn't tell you where my orchestration book is because I haven't used it in ages. It's all stuck in my head.
I searched on the internet.
That's the other possibility. Just Google it. Yeah, just Google it. But again, though, say I don't know where my Canon is. No, it's not up there. It's a different book. It was the same color, and I'm not wearing my glasses, so it looked the same. But I don't know where it is because I haven't looked at it in years. And there might be, for example, I might want to check the bottom note of a concert marimba, which is F for those of you playing at home. But if it's not a full-sized marimba, where does it go down to? What's the bottom note on a xylophone? What's the bottom note on a vibraphone? Those C's that are there. Is something transposed by 1 octave or 2? And those sort of things you do need to know. I think you really do have to take some time and learn them. And because I think we are very much trapped in the modern mindset of instant learning, instant gratification, instant this. Play the piano in 7 minutes. No, that's not playing the piano. It's playing a bunch of notes. You can't say somebody who's done half a dozen YouTube tutorials is going to be a better pianist than Lang Lang or something, because he's put in years, and they've just had their first child, so he was doing obviously something more than practicing. He was practicing until he got it right. But the thing is that we do want that instantaneous result, and sometimes music is not necessarily geared to that. Really good music playing is not geared to instant results from study.
I tried to learn the violin at sort of a late age. I was one of those who wanted to start looking at the Paganini and doing the vibrato at a beginner level, but found I just wasn't suited to be a violinist.
No, neither was I. The fingers are too thick.
Mine are too big.
Yeah, you're a woodwind player. Yeah, you're a woodwind with thick fingers. Bam, covers the holes. Yeah.
But even with big hands, it was a bit of a disadvantage on the clarinet too. I'd find.
I think if you got big hands, and I don't, I have small hands. I have quite small hands, especially for somebody my size. I mean, in the old money, I'm 5'11", and but I have really tiny hands. Thanks, Dad. But for us, for me, covering the holes was terrific. It was a happy accident because I loved the clarinet. And I started on the recorder and I wanted to play clarinet when I got big enough. And sure enough, fingers were all there. It was all great.
What about the fast passages? Can you find you can move quicker?
Oh, it's got nothing to do with finger size. That's to do with your tendon. Yeah. But that just takes practice and lightness and lack of tension. But the thing about string playing is, of course, you need to have, especially violin, you've got to make those really tiny spaces. And if you've got big, thick fingers like us, you can't do it. However, double bass is a different matter. Double bass players have big hands, and they're bloody gorillas, all of them. Even the women, and even the men, I should say. They're big hand, big, strong. Especially your left hand has got to be very strong. First time I found out about it, I sat in on an exam for a double bass player, and I couldn't work out why he was so out of tune. And the expert on the panel said, well, he doesn't have any left hand strength. Oh, that makes sense. But there are exercises to build that, but he just didn't have the left hand strength to play in tune. Whereas I think those of us with big chunky hands would do okay with double bass.
You got to push harder on the strings too, don't
you? You're going to have push down, but also I think you've got more ground to cover. Between notes. The difference in a semitone on a violin is quite marked to the difference of a semitone. When you get all four fingers like this, and that's perfect fourth, whereas I think it's probably more like that on a violin.
Yeah.
But I think your point about being suitable for an instrument is well made, because again, I would not be a very good trumpet player because my lips are kind of thick. But I've always wondered if I'd be a decent trombone player or tuba player.
Yeah, I tried to play the cornet in the school band, but I was always flat, Houston, all the time.
That could have been the instrument. Some of those school band instruments are a bit dodgy. But, did you pull in did anybody teach you to use the tuning slides?
No.
See, there you go. That might have been the fact that all you had to do was push the tuning slides in. But yeah, it could also be your embouchure being a bit slack. It's a very different embouchure to clarinet.
Had that problem in my probably first to second to third year on clarinet. I would be always flat on the throat nodes too, as well.
Yep. What instrument were you playing on?
I was on a Yamaha.
We won't mention brand names just in case they're terrible. Was it plastic?
No, it was wood.
Okay.
No, it was to do with
it's I
wasn't practicing with the tuner. I got a bit lazy.
Yeah.
But that was fixed.
Your embouchure probably was a little weak on the sides.
Yeah.
I was just to say that when you smile playing clarinet, you're in tune. You need that.
It just takes practice, Houston.
Well, that takes time. And that gets back to our original point that most people are actually interested in getting things now.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine play the trumpet in 5 minutes? No, not at all. You can make a sound, but you can't play the trumpet. And it's the same with other instruments. You can make a sound, other complex instruments.
Well, you want to know a funny story? I had what a Bond clarinet is? You heard of them?
Bond. Yeah. Yes, I've heard of them.
They're a shit box. Anyway, I had my first ever A clarinet. You couldn't tune this thing. It was so flat.
The Bonds are terrible. You probably needed a different tuning barrel.
I tried it, and I went to my repairer, Steve Giordani. He says he won't bother repairing them. They're rubbish.
No, it's the best thing to do with those instruments
Mm.
was to go camping. And when you needed firewood, you opened up the clarinet. And it was good kindling. It was very good. They were pretty awful. The very first instrument I played on was a lark, Chinese instrument. And they were spectacularly out of tune.
Oh.
And the real problem was that they had forgotten, or perhaps never knew, that when you hack the tree down, the boxwood down, you have to let it dry out and be thoroughly dead for about 10 years before you can actually put an instrument together around it. What they do is they just chop it, drill the holes, slap on the keys, stick it in the box, and sell it to you cheap. And so all these cheap clarinets were here in the 50s, 60s, and 70s with the word lark on them. And the wood was still growing.
Oh, good.
And so you'd eventually be taking out the clarinet and it would be like shaped like this. Because, all the keys and so on one side were hampering the growth. So it would grow on the other side. So you'd have these sort of strangely shaped clarinets that were out of tune and what were you going to do with them? You couldn't sell them to anybody. So they're the worst ones, those larks. A Marty was cheap for a while, but they were all plastic and had a pretty nasty tone, but they were all tuned sharp. Because they came from Eastern Europe, and all the Eastern European clarinets were tuned sharp because of the cold. And you would have two tuning barrels, one for summer, one for winter. And I know when I eventually got my pair, as we all had to, of Buffet R13s, which were the Ferraris of the clarinet world in the early 1980s. I was not allowed to play it for about 3 months.
Why?
No, don't play it. I said, why? She said, because you've got to oil it.
Yeah, wood.
And I said, well, so you spend every day for 3 months oiling the outside, and then you take a rag and pull it through and roll the inside, and really, really push it hard. You have to do that for about 3 months. It was every day for a month, every week for a month, and then once a day, then once a month for the rest of its life or something like that. But you had to wait until about 3 months in. And when you finally did, it was sweet. It was worth the wait.
Yeah,
but again, it's that thing about waiting for the perfect sound.
My A clarinet is a Buffet. It's the the E12, the bottom
E
of
series,
the line. Yeah, it's good. I paid about 2,500. It's wood. I've got a Yamaha, the 450.
Yeah, so you've got a mismatched pair. On a matched pair.
Because for a clarinet in a Yamaha, they want $5,000 for it.
Yeah,
I could get it cheaper with a Buffet.
Yeah, Buffet is fine. I don't mind Buffets. When I was a student, the Buffet pair was a little bit under, for the R13, was a bit under $3,000 for a pair. And there was one guy who was getting to import them, and he was selling them on from Eltham Woodwind Centre, I remember. And he was getting them and selling them for $1,800.
Shit.
I think just about every one of us bought a pair from him. I worked in a factory for 2 months, 3 months maybe, on my first university summer, and got enough to buy a pair of Buffet R13s and a car. So those were my two purchases for my summer. The Buffet R13 was top of the line. The car was very much bottom of the line. It was and your older readers your listeners will like, this was a 1967 Hillman Hunter. There you go, my first car. But it was definitely worth the 3 months that I spent. If you just hold on a minute. The clarinets actually outlasted the cases, the case it came in. So This is my 1981 clarinet. There it is, sitting there. The A clarinet's in another bag. But it was nice to have a matched pair because you didn't have to worry too much about tuning. That was where I was thinking a Yamaha and a Buffet. There might be tuning problems between them.
I look, when I got my Yamaha overhauled, he made it so much better than it was brand new.
Okay, good.
Which is because I went to Steve Giordano, did a really good job.
Good for him.
You know.
Yeah, a good woodwind player, a good woodwind repairer, is like a good mechanic. You know, once you find somebody who's going to look after your car, you're going to stick with them. The same with the woodwind repairs. We had one here in Melbourne that's now unfortunately closed. Lewis's music, and Roger Lewis did all my repairs when I was a student and afterwards. And unfortunately, he's retired. And but yeah, same thing. He made things sound better than they did when they came in off the shop. No, I think that's just the way a good repair person is. They know the instrument so well, and they know what works, and they have the patience and the eyesight to work with those tiny little screws and all that sort of stuff.
I tried to do it. I tried to pull my old Bond apart. It's a nightmare.
Well, yeah, it's probably not a bad thing to pull the Bond apart and just not putting it back together again. That's all right. But I've actually never met anybody who's had a Bond. Wow. You've just gone into my star pantheon of.
That's what I could afford.
You had a Bond. Oh my God. Yeah, so I couldn't afford anything other than the Marty until I went to uni and spent a year playing on this plastic clarinet. And then got the Buffet, and it was like night and day. It was like getting out of a really rough riding Datsun 200B, and just getting into a brand new slick Renault or something.
Well, I had a spare. It was the Yamaha, was the plastic one. It was pretty good. It was like, you know what you use for the marching band?
Yep.
So I took it to the repairer. He did a slight service. He made it like $1 million Ferrari.
Yeah. Well, those Yamaha plastics were actually quite good, and they were ideal for outdoor playing because they didn't get affected by the cold the way the wooden ones do. And they had a slight cutting timbre, slightly more high harmonics there. It wasn't quite the low harmonics there, which did well for outdoors. You need those outdoors. You need that extra push and the high frequencies, and they had that.
What if you're going to play a show inside the Northern Territory where it's muggy all year? Would you use a wood or a plastic? And it's very hot.
I'd say, can I sing instead? I don't know, really. I don't know what you have to ask a military bandsman. They're the ones who are very, very good at that sort of thing. They may end up having several, you know.
Have you noticed when it gets hot in Melbourne and you got wood, it sort of tightens a bit, or it affects?
Well, Melbourne's heat tends to be very dry.
Yeah, even Sydney too.
Sydney's is much more humid. But yes, it will get a little tighter and drier, and that's where the oil comes in. And you still, you never stop oiling your clarinet ever. Say once every 6 months even is enough. If you've got a wooden instrument, you treat it like a cricket bat. For the length of time that you have it, you oil it, you keep oiling it
until it breaks.
until it breaks and half of it goes flying across the room. Yeah. But no, you got to, and you got to, make sure that you rub out all the water tracks that are down the inside and so on. It's like having a pet that can't do anything for itself, nothing for itself, can't even feed itself. So there is a fair bit of care involved. But the thing about this, again, this whole discussion that we've been talking about is just how long it takes for the results to turn up. And we go back to this whole instant result thing that we want from everything else, and we expect it from everything else. I mean, how many people watching this would be incensed if the Uber delivery driver took more than 20 minutes or something? And that's crazy. It's just crazy thinking that you have that kind of entitlement.
Well, they're talking about drones to be delivering soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's nuts. People drones with your food. I wouldn't. It's bad enough. Yeah, some clot on a bike. Who's ever so likely to have an accident on a wet, especially when it's wet out like that, and go skidding away, and there goes your dinner, mate. But learn to cook. For example, if you're cooking it might take 2 hours, but the food's there. So I think what we're doing, even more so than we used to, as I think we are expecting things to be instant, to be right now, or at least very soon. And we'll complain till we're blue in the face if they're not. And I think we lose something from that. We lose a number of things, perhaps. We lose the ability to realize that time actually has more than one use. It's not instant, but time actually allows things to grow and flourish. Time allows things to mature. Time allows things to happen in such a way that you can reflect on it. Whereas if, you're not going to get to reflect much on your dinner if it just turns up on the doorstep.
Exactly.
Whereas if you cook it, you think, how many different ways can I cook this to make a different?
Like nobody becomes a Ricky Ponting overnight.
How many times did Bradman hit that golf ball with the stump? Or as we just found out recently about Ash Barty, when her parents were renovating their house, they took out their garage and there's this duct tape across a brick wall, which is at the approximate height of a tennis net. And apparently she spent hours and hours out there with her tennis ball, practicing getting it over the net. That's not something that happens instantaneously. That's years and years and years of playing and years of preparation. And do you do that?
What's been are you still playing clarinet, or what's happened with you?
I'm not doing much clarinet playing now.
Did you get injured or something like that?
I was injured back in 87. And what happened was, although I came back fairly quickly and won an audition to play in the Victorian State Opera Youth Orchestra, which was terrific. I was the principal bass clarinet, so that was great. And I would have stayed on there, except what happened was the injury was a cut right through this tendon area. But what happened shortly after was that the nerves started to die back, and I started to lose all feeling in this area. And the ability to do this, which when you're a clarinet player, it's a very useful thing to be able to do because it opens 2 octaves of the instrument to you, or saxophone. Flute, less so, but I still couldn't move my thumb properly. And it took 4 years to recover. Now, 4 years is a long time. It's a lot of practice for other people to be doing while you're doing nothing. And when I first tried to come back, the first concert I did was the Peter Towerton Clarinet Sonata. And I realized I just could not practice it enough without my hand. getting tired. But by then I had a master's and a PhD in composition and another master's in choral conducting. So I was on that line, on that trajectory.
Mm.
But along came the concept of improvisation and less practice time, but knowing the instrument as I do, creating a new way of playing the instrument. And so we for years had a group in Wollongong called the Wollongong Anarchist Noisemakers Collective. The word collective was spelled with a K, so I need not tell you the initials were WANK. And we worked together for about 10 years, and we've all seemed to have migrated over a period of time to Melbourne. And so here we're not called the Wollongong Anarchist Noisemakers Collective anymore. It doesn't make a lot of sense. We actually are called Third Rail, and because you touch the third rail, you die. You know? So that's Third Rail gigs come up every so often. I do a little bit of teaching of clarinet, sax, and flute when necessary, but most of the time I'm not playing, and I'm conducting or composing or recently acting a lot more than I was, and doing a bit of stand-up comedy. And that's how I spend my days. And I do some teaching at Australian Catholic University, a couple of days a week. And I live in the skies above Footscray, which is a lovely place to live. 10 minutes, 12 minutes from the city. With a great view of the skyline out there. And and right by the Maribyrnong River, which today looks like there's no wind, there seems to be no tide at the moment in either direction, no tidal flow. And it looks like somebody has just put tinfoil down there. It's like a model village down there. And that's a tinfoil river down there. Quite beautiful. It'll start the tidal flow will start in a couple of hours, probably upstream. But I'm rather enjoying not being a clarinetist, I suppose. But oddly, the YouTube video that was put up a couple of days ago did in fact talk a lot about my clarinet playing, and how I seem to have written a fair bit for clarinet, and most of it seems to be performed somewhere, and that I may well have a natural advantage over other composers. I think there's 12 clarinet pieces out of my group list of 90 or so that are published. 12 of them have.
Look, that's amazing if you can get your work performed in public or at the opera house. Have you played in any symphony orchestras professionally?
Oh yeah, I played in symphony orchestras and also pit orchestras. Yeah. That was in the Victorian State Opera's youth orchestra. I was playing in the musicals for National Music Camp in the United States. Played a couple there. Played in a couple of pickup orchestras as well. But most of that was before 1987, when the accident happened. I don't think I've played in an orchestra probably for over 30 years. I've been standing on the podium waving my arms in time to the music.
The closest I got, I auditioned for the Sydney Symphony Fellowship. I didn't get through that, but I've played in some community orchestras. Played in the orchestra at where I studied. Hansel and Gretel was the biggest opera I did. I was transposing horn parts, so those are my achievements. Although I've never been paid professionally to do it, but gave it a shot.
Where do you live now?
I'm in Bringelly, Sydney, Western Sydney.
Western Sydney.
Yeah.
Is there there's obviously a good community orchestra somewhere that you could join?
I used to play for the Campbelltown Fishers Ghost Youth Orchestra.
Campbelltown Fishers Ghost. Yes. Yeah, I know what that means about the bridge and the ghost of the bridge. Yeah. Do they still run?
Yeah. But since
Oh,
COVID, I think they're cutting back.
well, everyone has, but down here things are starting to open up quite well. And Melbourne is a city of watchers, a city of spectators. People will go to see anything in this town. We just had the vastly curtailed Melbourne International Comedy Festival, which was just the Melbourne Comedy Festival, because there's no internationals here. But we had that, and it went well. People did come out, and so I think the same thing will happen nationwide. I'm sure it's happening in Sydney as things are opening up there. But you were never quite as locked down as we were. Yeah, I think there'll be plenty of opportunity for people to perform. Not too far from now, not too far distant from now. And I think the community orchestras will come back, community choirs will come back. It'll all be just like it was, except it'll probably be standing a little further apart.
Yeah. The new normal, it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, fantastic show with you today, Houston.
I'll let you talk to you too.
All right, thank you for listening to today's episode of the podcast. Podcasts are out every Friday, so don't forget to like, subscribe, share, turn on notifications. Also, follow me on social media. You can follow me on Webtalk. Now I'm on a new social media platform, which is awesome. Webtalk is free, and they're sharing 10% revenue share for the first 100 million customers, I think. Double check that. You can check that out on the website, but if you sign up for Webtalk now, there's a chance to be monetized. I'll leave a link in the description for that. And yeah, great episode today. Bye for now.